Hello again, it's Michael from Mirrors of Consciousness and creator of the Orbifold Tarot. This will be the second video of the series of basics of reading with the Orbifold. Last video we looked at the elements, the basic qualities of each element, and now I think I'd like to go over the numbers, ace to 10, for the minors. Again, for now we're just working with the half a deck where each of the elements is in its pure form. Now that we have an idea of the overview of the qualities of each element, now we see how the elements develop from ace through 10, through 2, excuse me, ace through 2, 3, 4, on so on, up to 10. In the same way that the elements went from most subtle to most dense, from air to earth, each of the elements also go from most subtle or purest at the ace to most dense, or in a way most complicated, at earth. At 10, excuse me, sorry. So that's kind of one of the first ideas about working with the numbers. You don't necessarily have to remember what each number means on its own. That's certainly a very helpful way to work, but you don't have to start there. You can start with the idea that the aces, or the low numbers, are the beginnings, and they're kind of the growth stage of that element. They're the least complicated in a way. They're the simplest manifestation of that element. Then the higher numbers, the 10s, 9s, 8s, they're kind of the most complicated, and not, I think sometimes we think of complicated as a bad thing. It's not necessarily. Complicated is good. It's sophisticated. It's developed. So 10, 9, 8 is the most developed form of that element, the most matured form of that element, which can be a little bit complicated, can be maybe not as easy to deal with as the simpler form, the lower numbers, but it's an important part of the cycle. And then, of course, in the middle, we have the 5s. 4, 5, 6 are the middle numbers, but 5 is right in the middle. And so when you have more middle numbers, 4, 5s, and 6s, it means that the element is in the middle of its development. It's not simple anymore. It's not the most basic form of the element, but it's also not the most complex or the most developed. There's some middle ground. It's maybe more changeable at that stage too. So just with that idea in mind of the numbers going from least complicated or most simple, most pure, to more developed, more complicated, more involved, more mature too, to some degree. And then there's some middle ground. So when you draw 3 or 4 cards or more, as some of us like to do, you can just look at what are the overall numbers. Are there a lot of low numbers? Are there a lot of high numbers? Are there a lot of middle numbers? If there's a lot of low numbers, then you can kind of already overview assess that this reading, this particular situation, is about newness, about beginnings, about growth and development, but it's in the nurturing stage of growth. It's the start. It may not be the ace start. Ace is the very, very, very beginning, but even 2, 3, maybe even into the 4 is the beginning stages. It's a startup business if it's earth, or an idea that's not fully fleshed out yet. Maybe a first or second draft of an email if it's air. Those kind of ideas. And then the 10, and then if the overall spread, if the overall reading, most of the cards are in the 8, 9, 10 range, even 7 to some degree, but 8, 9, 10 range, that usually you can assess that the situation is about endings, about nearing the end. It's about maturation and maybe being so near the end that sometimes the person wants to give up, or it's so near the end, if it's 10, if it's a lot of 10s, it means that something's really going to end soon. And that can at times be a relief, and sometimes it can also be a little bit of a burden. So that idea is on that end. And then if the overall reading has mostly 4s, 5s, 6s, the middle ground, then this situation is about being in the middle. They're not quite a beginner, they're not quite new in the situation, but they're not quite fully mature in the situation. It's developed, but it maybe hasn't fully seen fruit, or it's seen some fruit, but there's much more room to grow. It's a midpoint in the situation that's being asked about. Then, sometimes, of course, there won't always be lots of low numbers, or lots of high numbers, or lots of middle numbers. Sometimes you'll have a couple of low numbers and a couple of high numbers, but none in the middle. So it could be a situation where the person is really good at beginnings and really good at endings, but maybe not so good at the stuff, the development, the stuff that goes on in between beginnings and endings. So it may be a situation that the person likes to start new projects often and then abandon them when they seem to get too much and don't have the perseverance to go through. Similarly, if it's all low numbers, kind of low and middle numbers, then maybe the situation is about good beginnings, good middle, good development, but the idea is never really seen to its full development. The thing, the project, the idea, the relationship, the situation is never really quite seen right to the end, or is right now at that point where it needs to be seen through the end. It's already got the first two stages, the beginning and the middle, but it doesn't have an end yet. And then, of course, our third, if we look beginning, middle, end, our third possibility is lots of middle and lots of end, but nothing fresh, no new ideas, no new beginnings, nothing to really nurture from the seed, nothing to really look after from near the beginning where it's fresh and where it's simple. So that's kind of an overview of how to look at numbers without actually really looking specifically at what each and every single number means, but it can give you an overview of the reading. The last thing I'll say about that is that, of course, we also have the possibility that you'll have a fairly even distribution of all the numbers from A's to 10. So if it's only a 4-card spread, you obviously won't have all 10 numbers in 4 cards. But if you have maybe an ace or a 2, and then a 4 or a 5 or a 6 somewhere there, and then a 6 or 7, and then a 9 or a 10 near the end, then that's kind of a good indication that the reading, the process of the situation that's being asked about is fairly well balanced at each stage. And you can maybe go into a little bit more detail about which stages they are, and maybe connect where the in-betweens may need some work. But overall, it's fairly balanced. The overall cycle is fairly balanced. Speaking of cycles, that's the other way of looking of Ace to 10, is a complete cycle. So even from the 10 actually goes back around to the Ace. So even though 10s are near the end, they're an ending, and Aces are beginnings, really in a lot of ways the Ace is contained in a 10, and the 10 is contained in the ace. This is an idea that will really help more, I think, when we get to court cards in a few videos from now, but you'll be able to skip ahead to those if you need. So keep that idea that the 10 is contained in the ace is contained in the 10, and it's always just a cycle that just keeps going round and round and round, because it's always the case. We end something and we always start something new. It may be something completely different. It could be that the ending of something is really the end of that thing. It's over. And the ace that it contains is a totally different thing, but it's going to be a new thing, or maybe a return to something that was already started. Another way to think of the numbers too is not only counting from ace to 10, but counting from 10 to ace, and so going from complicated and dense to more simple. I think sometimes we're interested in especially things like Earth, the Pentacle suit, where we want abundance and we want prosperity and all of that stuff, which is of course great. I want that stuff too, but sometimes we actually need to go backward and look more at the simpler things. Yes, abundance and prosperity are great, but maybe it's you can get more out of what you have if you can appreciate the simple things and the joy and the foundation that's created for yourself when you just have a simple, nice, comfortable bed to sleep in, and that's it, and that's enough. Similar with all the other suits, but Earth is a nice example there. So we can count down to get to the most, get down to the essence of the element. What's the purest aspect, the purest quality of that element? So that's about all I'll say for now about the general numbers, and we'll go a little bit deeper into each of the numbers specifically, number by number, over the next few videos. So stay tuned.
Scivolate, volare, davanti, state triste.